Welcome to the Susie King Taylor House. We are the co-founders, Sister Roz. I am Sister Pat, and we are the co-founders of the Center for Jubilee, now formerly known as the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee. We have been lobbying for the past 2.5 years for a public square to become the Susie King Taylor Square. The square has been unnamed with a 9-0 vote, but we're still in lobbying mode. The Center for Jubilee, Reconciliation and Healing is a public grassroots policy organization, and our goal is to change policies that hurt. It's time for truth-telling, reconciliation, healing, and repair, and we are so honored to be here and witness that you're going to do a reading on the life of our African-American heroine, Shiro, Susie King Taylor. Roz will share who is Susie King Taylor. Sister Roz, a national slave reenactor.
Susie King Taylor, she was born in Liberty County, about 30 miles from here, called Liberty County, under the slave law of Georgia. Now, she came to Savannah around age 7, but with permission from her grandmother, Dolly Reed, who was a freed slave here in the city of Savannah, and I often refer to it as her beloved second home. She was educated at the secret schools, the bucket schools, because enslaved African Americans were not allowed to get a free education. Her grandmother fought hard, she prayed hard, and once Susie got all the learning that she could get here in Savannah at the schools here, she also joined the Union soldiers in South Carolina under the 33rd Infantry Division over in St. Simon, St. Catherine's Island, South Carolina. She was a nurse during the Civil War. She served her country with pride and dignity. She took care of the sick and dying. Her whole heart went into her work. She taught the soldiers during downtime how to read and write. She loved her country. And if she was alive in this space, in this time, she would say, "Thank y'all, Savannah. It's about time." 175 years later, and y'all still talking about me? Susie King Taylor, what an honor. Thank y'all. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd like the audience to know that as we met with the city officials in the world, we want you to know as we met with city officials, it's not just two of us. We have a coalition to rename Calhoun Square, and they are the real heroes. They're the heroes because they're members of the community from all walks of life, all hues, all backgrounds. And we also engage the neighbors around the square. They're the brave ones that went and knocked door to door because it was unsafe for Sister Roz and I to appear. To this very day, we have 22 squares, one unnamed and the other 21, nothing personal, gentlemen, but they're all men. And we think that a woman should be on a square in this 21st century.
That's right.
And so we thank the Theater War Productions for coming in December and doing Antigone in Savannah, especially the ones that were in Ferguson that came here and paid homage in the choir. We thank you for coming. And so when Brian called and said, "I think I have another way of pushing the button for this lobbying effort," he's coming back. We thank you. We thank you. We thank you, Brian, and Theater of War and your entire team. Say her name, Susie King Taylor. Say her name.
Say her name.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Sister Pat, Sister Roz. It's such an honor to be collaborating with you again and the center, the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee. Once again, what an absolute honor to be with you. My name is Brian Dories. I'm the artistic director of Theater of War Productions, and we're a company that works with leading film, theater, and television actors to present dramatic readings of seminal texts, from classical Greek tragedies to sermons to books, speeches, plays, and modern works of poetry, to provide a framework for engaging communities in powerful discussions about pressing issues of public health and social justice. And we are thrilled that you could join us tonight for the premiere of the Susie King Taylor Project, our final virtual performance under the banner of our Nurse Antigone initiative this year, co-presented by Theater of War Productions, the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee in Savannah, Georgia, and DAV, Disabled American Veterans. The Susie King Taylor Project will feature dramatic readings of Susie King Taylor's Civil War memoir as a catalyst for a guided audience discussion grounded in the perspectives of Black nurses and veterans, aimed at generating compassion, awareness, connection and much needed healing. Before getting started, I just want to highlight that tonight's event will feature closed captioning in English on Zoom. To access those live captions, please activate them now at the bottom of your screen, where you can also adjust the font size. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our co-hosts, DAV and the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee. Special thanks go to Rob Lewis and Victoria Short at DAV for promoting the event and assembling our amazing panel of nurses and veterans. And our heartfelt thanks go to Sisters Pat and Roz and Peggy Hillary at the Susie King Taylor Center, which will be hosting a ground site tonight, as you've already seen in Savannah, where local nurses, teachers, and community members are gathering to watch the performance and take part in the discussion. The Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee is a grassroots public policy organization, and I think you just heard it from Sister Pat, the co-founder of the center herself. Their goal is to educate locals and visitors in the history of slavery in order to empower individuals and nonprofit organizations and governmental institutions, schools, colleges, and churches to create tools for positive change and change policies that hurt across the state of Georgia. To learn more about their work, donate, and get involved with their campaign to rename the square that we mentioned earlier in downtown Savannah after Susie King Taylor, please visit their website at centerforjubilee.com. We're dropping that into the chat now. I also want to thank our core partners for the Nurse Antigone Initiative, a project by and for nurses, which over the past 12 months has presented readings of Sophocles' Antigones and other texts on Zoom to help frame crucial conversations about the past, present, and future of nursing at this critical juncture in the history of nursing. Thanks to the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics, the Resilient Nurses Initiative of Maryland, and most critically to the Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund for supporting the Nurse Antigone Initiative and for making not just tonight's event possible, but the entire run over the last year. Our thanks also go to the Mellon Foundation for supporting our digital programming. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge Theater of War Productions, company manager and producer, Marjolaine Goldsmith, the architect of our work on Zoom, who will be conducting tonight's event behind the scenes, making it all happen. And now it gives me such immense pleasure to introduce you to my friend and collaborator, Charlene Lass, who will be co-facilitating tonight's event with me. Charlene was one of the first participants in our nurse chorus in the Nurse Antigone last March, and I'm delighted that she's agreed to join us again in this new capacity tonight and co-facilitate tonight's conversation with me. Over to you, Charlene.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene. I have been a nurse for over 30 years. I've practiced in the fields of neonatal intensive care unit, pediatrics, and now vascular access. As Brian said, I became involved with Theater of War March of last year when I was chosen to be a chorus member with Nurse Antigone. Nurse Antigone. That was a truly groundbreaking, life-changing project that framed powerful, guided discussions about the challenges that my nursing colleagues and I faced before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been many, many times that I've wanted to tap out and be done with nursing. However, being a part of Theater of War community, where conversations are encouraged and unique perspectives are welcome, has kept me grounded. It's kept me connected, and Theater of War has been instrumental to me remaining in nursing. I am looking forward to this evening, hearing the memoirs of the first Black nurse read by an amazingly talented actress. I am excited to be a co-facilitator with Brian, and I am privileged to be sharing this dynamic space with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlene. It is a distinct honor to be working with you tonight to co-facilitate the discussion. I can't wait to hear your questions of the audience tonight. The Susie King Taylor Project is going to unfold in 3 parts this evening. First, the actress Tracie Thoms, whom you may know from films like Rent, The Devil Wears Prada, and series like Truth Be Told. She's going to perform selections from Susie King Taylor's memoir. And as many of you may have seen in our previous advertisements, we'd originally confirmed Samira Wiley to read tonight, but unfortunately her schedule changed and she couldn't be with us. But thankfully, our company has more than 200 actors who are ready to jump in for each other when needed. And I was so thrilled when Tracie stepped into the breach. And I know you will be too when you hear her bring Susie King Taylor's words to life tonight. When Tracie's reading is over, about 50 minutes into our event, she'll sit in the audience, so to speak, and we'll bring up 6 community panelists onto the screen. These are Black nurses and veterans from all over the country and from a variety of backgrounds who are going to respond from their hearts and their guts to what they heard in Susie King Taylor's memoir that resonated with them tonight. Following their brief opening remarks, we'll open up the floor to what we hope will be a lively, healing, constructive discussion with you, our audience. During the discussion, Charlene and I will ask questions about Susie King Taylor's memoir and what it says to you today. And if you'd like to respond to one of our questions, we just simply ask you use the raise your hand function on Zoom to indicate you have something to say. And for each question, we'll call on a number of people, both at the Susie King Taylor House and also on Zoom on your personal devices, and we'll promote you to the screen for the duration of your remarks. This is still new territory for us, a new way of performing, a new way of communicating. So we apologize in advance for the fact that we won't get to everyone who raises their hand, and there could be glitches, technical issues during the event. But from our perspective, that's totally okay, because making mistakes and repairing and overcoming them is at the center of our model. Our hope is that by making mistakes and then adapting and repairing from them, we are modeling for you as an audience what we hope you will do during the discussion. We hope you'll take a risk and join us and make a mistake or not sound brilliant or polished in order to be present in the moment with each other without judgment and with shared vulnerability. This is what makes us human, and it's the only way forward and out of this mess. So before we get started, here's all you need to know. Susie King Taylor, as Sister Roz said, was born into slavery in 1848 on the Grest Plantation in Liberty County, Georgia, just outside of Savannah. She learned to read and write in secret schools led by Black women. And in 1862, at age 14, she escaped to freedom on St. Simon's Island off the southern coast of Georgia. It was there that she began to serve as a laundress, and then as the first Black nurse in the Union Army, joining the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, a Black regiment that was later reorganized as the 33rd U.S. Colored Regiment. She also became the first Black teacher to openly educate African Americans in Georgia. In her searing, unforgettable memoir, Susie King Taylor describes her 4 years without formal training or pay, caring for wounded and sick soldiers of the 33rd United States Colored Infantry Regiment. And she also offers her reflections on life and conditions after the war and a powerful indictment of the Jim Crow South that speaks to the present moment with uncanny prescience and clarity, as if it were written for our time. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn things over to Tracie Thoms for her reading of selections from Susie King Taylor's memoir, Reminiscences from My Life in Camp, the 33rd United States Colored Troops, late 1st South Carolina Volunteers. Over to you, Tracie.
Reminiscences of My Life in Camp with the 33rd United States Colored Troops, late 1st South Carolina Volunteers. My childhood. I was born under the slave law in Georgia in 1848 and was brought up by my grandmother in Savannah. There were 3 of us with her, my younger sister and brother. My brother and I, being the 2 eldest, we were sent to a friend of my grandmother, Mrs. Woodhouse, a widow, to learn to read and write. She was a free woman and lived on Bay Lane between Habersham and Price Streets, about half a mile from my house. We went every day about 9 o'clock with our books wrapped in paper to prevent the police or white persons from seeing them. We went in one at a time, through the gates, into the yard, to the L kitchen, which was the schoolroom. We had 25 or 30 children whom she taught, assisted by her daughter, Mary Jane. The neighbors would see us going in sometimes, but they supposed we were there learning trades, as it was the custom to give children a trade of some kind. After school, we left the same way we entered, one by one. We would go to the square about a block from the school and wait for each other. We would gather laurel leaves and pop them on our hands on our way home. I remained at her school for 2 years or more when I was sent to a Mrs. Mary Beasley, where I continued until May 1860, when she told my grandmother she had taught me all she knew, and grandmother had better get someone else who could teach me more. So I stopped my studies for a while. I had a white playmate about this time named Katie O'Connor, who lived on the next corner of the street from my house and who attended a convent. One day she told me if I would promise not to tell her father, she would give me some lessons. On my promise not to do so and getting her mother's consent, she gave me lessons about 4 months every evening. At the end of this time, she was put into the convent permanently, and I have never seen her since. A month after this, James Bluey, our landlord's son, was attending the high school and was very fond of grandmother. So she asked him to give me a few lessons, which he did until the middle of 1861, when the Savannah Volunteer Guards, to which he and his brother belonged, were ordered to the front under General Barton. In the First Battle of Manassas, his brother Eugene was killed, and James deserted over to the Union side, and at the close of the war went to Washington, D.C., where he has since resided. I often wrote passes for my grandmother, for all colored persons, free or slaves, were compelled to have a pass. Free colored people having a guardian in place of a master. And these passes were good until 10 or 10:30 p.m. for one night or every night for 1 month. The pass read as follows: Savannah, Georgia, March 1st, 1860. Pass the bearer from 9 to 10:30 p.m. Valentine Grest. Every person had to have this pass, for at 9 o'clock each night a bell was rung, and any colored persons found on the street after this hour were arrested by the watchman and put in the guardhouse until next morning, when their owners would pay their fines and release them. I knew a number of persons who went out at any time at night and were never arrested, as the watchman knew them so well he never stopped them. It was seldom asked to see their passes, only stopping them long enough sometimes to say howdy and then tell them to go along. Now, about this time, I had been reading so much about the Yankees. I was very anxious to see them. The whites would tell their colored people not to go to the Yankees, for they would harness them to carts and make them pull the carts around in place of horses. I asked grandmother one day if this was true. She replied, certainly not. But the white people did not want slaves to go over to the Yankees and told them these things to frighten them. Don't you see those signs pasted about the trees? One reading, I'm a rattlesnake. If you touch me, I will strike. Another reads, I'm a wildcat, beware, etc. These are warnings to the North, so don't mind what them white people say. I wanted to see these wonderful Yankees so much, as I heard my parents and the Yankees were going to set all the slaves free. Oh, how those people prayed for freedom. I remember one night, my grandmother went out into the suburbs of the city to a church meeting, and they were fervently singing this old hymn. Yes, we all shall be free. Yes, we all shall be free. Yes, we all shall be free when the Lord shall appear. When the police came in and arrested all who were there, saying they were planning freedom and sang the Lord in place of Yankee to blind anyone who might be listening. Our grandmother never forgot that night. Although she did not stay in the guardhouse, as she sent to her guardian, who came at once for her, but this was the last meeting she ever attended out of the city proper. On April 1st, 1862, about the time the Union soldiers were firing on Fort Pulaski, I was sent out into the country to my mother. I remember what a roar and din the guns made. They jarred the earth for miles. The fort was at last taken by them. 2 days after the taking of Fort Pulaski, my uncle took his family of 7 and myself to St. Catherine Island. We landed under the protection of the Union fleet and remained there 2 weeks, when about 30 of us were taken aboard the gunboat P to be transferred to St. Simon's Island. And at last, to my unbounded joy, I saw the Yankee. After we were all settled aboard and started on our journey, Captain Whitmore, commanding the boat, asked me where I was from. I told him Savannah, Georgia. He asked if I could read. I said, yes. Can you write? He next asked. Yes, I could do that also, I replied. And as if he had some doubts of my answers, he handed me a book and a pencil and told me to write my name and where I was from. I did this. Then he wanted to know if I could sew. On hearing I could, he asked me to hem some napkins for him. He was surprised at my accomplishments, for they were such in those days. For he said he did not know there were any Negroes in the South able to read or write. He said, well, you seem to be so different from the other colored people who came from the same place you did. No, I replied. The only difference is they were reared in the country and I in the city, as was a man from Darien, Georgia, named Edward King. And that seemed to satisfy him. And we had no further conversation that day on the subject. In the afternoon, the captain spied a boat in the distance, and as it drew nearer, he noticed it had a white flag hoisted. But before it had reached the Potomac, he ordered all passengers between decks so we could not be seen, for he thought they might be spies. The boat finally drew alongside of our boat and had Mr. Edward Donegal on board, who wanted his 2 servants, Nick and Judith. He wanted these, as they were his own children. Our captain told him he knew nothing of them, which was true, for at the time they were on St. Simon's, and not, as their father supposed, on our boat. After the boat left, we were allowed to come up on deck again. On St. Simon's Island, 1862. Next morning, we arrived at St. Simon's, and the captain told Commodore Goldsborough about this affair, and his reply was, "Captain Whitmore, you should not have allowed them to return. You should have kept them." After I had been on St. Simon's about 3 days, Commodore Goldsborough heard of me and came to Gaston Bluff to see me. I found him very cordial. He said Captain Whitmore had spoken to him of me, and that he was pleased to hear of my being so capable, etc., and wished me to take charge of a school for the children on the island. I told him I would gladly do so if I could have some books. He said I should have them, and in a week or 2 I received 2 large boxes of books and testaments from the North. I had about 40 children to teach, beside a number of adults who came to me at nights, all of them so eager to learn to read above anything else. Chaplain French of Boston would come to the school sometimes and lecture to the pupils on Boston and the North. Now, about the 1st of June, we were told that there was going to be a settlement of the war. Those who were on the Union side would remain free, and those in bondage would work 3 days for their masters and 3 for themselves. It was a gloomy time for us all, and we would be sent to Liberia. Chaplain French asked me, would I rather go back to Savannah or go to Liberia? I told him the latter place by all means. We did not know when this would be, but we were prepared in case this settlement should be reached. However, the Confederates would not agree to the arrangement, or else it was one of the many rumors flying about at the time, as we heard nothing further of the matter. There were a number of settlements on this island of St. Simon's, just like little villages, and we would go from one to the other on business, to call, or only for a walk. The latter part of August 1862, Captain C.T. Tobridge, with his brother John and Lieutenant Walker, came to St. Simon's Island from Hilton Head by order of General Hunter to get all the men possible to finish filling his regiment when he had organized it in March 1862. He had heard of the skirmish on this island and was very much pleased at the bravery shown by these men. He found me at Gaston Bluff teaching my little school and was much interested in it. When I knew him better, I found him to be a thorough gentleman and a staunch friend to my race. Captain Tobridge remained with us until October, when the order was received to evacuate, and so we boarded the Bendeford, a transport for Beaufort, South Carolina. When we arrived in Beaufort, Captain Trowbridge and the men he had enlisted went to camp at Old Fort, which they named Camp Saxton. I was enrolled as a laundress. The first suits worn by the boys were red coats and pants, which they disliked very much, for they said, the rebels see us miles away. The first colored troops did not receive any pay for 18 months, and the men had to depend wholly on what they received from the commissary established by General Saxton. A great many of these men had large families, and they had no money to give them. The wives were obliged to support themselves and children by washing for the officers of the gunboats and the soldiers, and making cakes and pies, which they sold to the boys in the camp. Finally, in 1863, the government decided to give them half pay. But the men would not accept this. They wanted full pay or nothing. They preferred rather to give their services to the state, which they did until 1864, when the government granted them full pay with all the back pay due. I remember Captain Heasley telling his company one day, "Boys, stand up for your full pay. I am with you, and so are all the officers." This captain was from Pennsylvania and was a very good man. All the men liked him. N.G. Parker, our first lieutenant, was from Massachusetts. H.A. Beach was from New York. He was a very delicate, he had to resign in 1864 on account of ill health. I had a number of relatives in this regiment, several uncles, some cousins, and a husband in Company E, and a number of cousins in other companies. Major Strong of this regiment started home on a furlough, but the vessel he was aboard got lost, and he never reached his home. He was one of the best officers we had. After his death, Captain C.T. Tobridge was promoted Major, August 1863, and filled Major Strong's place until December 1864, when he was promoted Lieutenant Colonel, which he remained until he was mustered out, February 6, 1866. In February 1863, several cases of varioloid broke out among the boys, which caused some anxiety in the camp. Edward Davis of Company E, the company I was with, had it very badly. He was put into a tent apart from the rest of the men, and only the doctor and camp steward, James Cummins, were allowed to see or attend him. But I went to see this man every day and nursed him. The last thing at night, I always went in to see that he was comfortable. But in spite of the good care and attention he received, he succumbed to the disease. I was not in the least afraid of the smallpox. I had been vaccinated, and I drank sassafras tea constantly, which kept my blood purged and prevented me from contracting this dread scourge. And no one need fear getting it if they will only keep their blood in good condition with this sassafras tea and take it before going where the patient is. Camp Saxton, Proclamation and Barbecue, 1863. On the 1st of January, 1863, we held services for the purpose of listening to the reading of President Lincoln's proclamation by Dr. W.H. Brisbane and the presentation of two beautiful stands of colors, one from a lady in Connecticut and the other from Reverend Mr. Cheever. The presentation speech was made by Chaplain French. It was a glorious day for all of us, and we enjoyed every minute of it. And as a fitting close to the crowning event of this occasion, we had a grand barbecue. A number of oxen were roasted whole, and we had a fine feast. Although not served as tastily or correctly as it would have been at home, yet it was enjoyed with keen appetites and relish. The soldiers had a good time. They sang or shouted, "Hurrah!" all through the camp, and seemed overflowing with fun and frolic until taps were sounded, when many, no doubt, dreamt of this memorable day. I had rather an amusing experience. That is, it seems amusing now as I look back, but at the time it occurred, it was a most serious one to me. When our regiment left Beaufort for Seabrook, I left some of my things with a neighbor who lived outside of the camp. And I had been at Seabrook almost a week, and I decided to return to Camp Saxon to get them. So one morning, with Mary Shaw, a friend who was in the company at that time, we started off. Now, there was no way for us to get to Beaufort other than to walk, except we rode on the commissary wagon. This we did and reached Beaufort about 1 o'clock. When then we had more than 2 miles to walk before reaching our old camp, and expected we would be able to accomplish this and return in time to meet the wagon again by 3 o'clock that afternoon, and so be taken back. Well, we failed to do this. However, for when we got to Beaufort, the wagon was gone. We did not know what to do. I did not wish to remain overnight, neither did my friend, although we might easily have stayed, as both had relatives in town. It was in the springtime. The days were long, and as the sun looked so bright, we concluded to walk back, thinking we should reach camp before dark. So off we started on our 10-mile tramp. We had not gone many miles, however, before we were all tired out and began to regret our undertaking. The sun was getting low, and we were getting more frightened, fearful of meeting some animal or of treading on a snake on our way. We did not meet a person, and we were frightened almost to death. Our feet were so sore we could hardly walk. Finally, we took off our shoes and tried walking in our stocking feet, but this made them worse. We had gone about 6 miles when the night overtook us. There we were. There was nothing around us but dense woods, and as there was no house or any place to stop at, there was nothing for us to do but continue on. We were afraid to speak to each other. Meanwhile, at the camp, seeing no signs of us by dusk, they concluded we'd decided to remain over until next day, and so had no idea of our plight. Imagine their surprise when we reached camp at around 11 p.m. The guard challenged us, "Who comes there?" My answer was, "A friend without a countersign." When he approached and saw who it was, reported me, and we were admitted into the lines. Oh, they had the joke on us that night. And for a long time after would tease us. And sometimes some of the men who were on guard that night would call us deserters. Yeah, they used to laugh at us, but we joined with them too. Especially when we would tell them our experience on our way to camp. I did not undertake that trip again. And there was no way of getting in or out except one took the provisionary wagon, and then there was no much dependence on that to be returning to camp. Perhaps the driver would say 1 hour and he might be there earlier or later. Of course, it was not his fault, as it depended when the order was filled at the commissary department. Therefore, I did not go any more until the regiment was ordered to our new camp, which was named after our hero, Colonel Shaw, who at that time was at Beaufort with his regiment, the 54th Massachusetts. I taught a great many of the comrades in Company E to read and write when they were off duty. Nearly all were anxious to learn. My husband taught some also when it was convenient for him. I was very happy to know my efforts were successful in camp, and also felt grateful for the appreciation of my services. I gave my services willingly for 4 years and 3 months without receiving $1. I was glad, however, to be allowed to go with the regiment to care for the sick and afflicted comrades. Military expeditions and life in camp. In the latter part of 1862, the regiment made an expedition into Darien, Georgia, and up the ridge, and on January 23, 1863, another up St. Mary's River, capturing a number of stores for the government and then on to Fernandina, Florida. They were gone 10 or 12 days, at the end of which time they returned to camp. March 10th, 1863, we were ordered to Jacksonville, Florida. Leaving Camp Saxon between 4 and 5 o'clock, we arrived at Jacksonville about 8 o'clock next morning, accompanied by 3 or 4 gunboats. When the rebels saw these boats, they ran out of the city, leaving the women behind, and we found out afterwards that they thought we had a much larger fleet than we really had. Our regiment was kept out of sight until we made fast at the wharf where it landed, and while the gunboats were shelling up the river and as far inland as possible, the regiment landed and marched up the street, where they spied the rebels who had fled from the city. They were hiding behind a house about a mile or so away, their faces blackened to disguise themselves as Negroes. And our boys, as they advanced toward them, halted a second, saying, "They are black men. Let them come to us, and we will make them know who we are." With this, the firing was opened, and several of our men were wounded and killed. The rebels had a number wounded and killed. It was through this way the discovery was made that they were white men. Our men drove them some distance in retreat and then threw out their pickets. While the fighting was on, a friend, Lizzie Lancaster, and I stopped at several of the rebel homes, and after talking with some of the women and children, we asked them if they had any food. They claimed to have only some hardtack and evidently did not care to give us anything to eat, but this was not surprising. They were bitterly against our people and had no mercy or sympathy for us. The second day, our boys were reinforced by a regiment of white soldiers, a main regiment, and by cavalry, and had quite a fight. On the third day, Edward Herron, who was a fine gunner on the steamer John Adams, came on shore, bringing a small cannon, which the men pulled along for more than 5 miles. This cannon was the only piece for shelling. On coming upon the enemy, all secured their places, and they had a lively fight, which lasted several hours, and our boys were nearly captured by the Confederates. But the Union boys carried out all their plans that day and succeeded in driving the enemy back. After this skirmish, every afternoon between 4 and 5 o'clock, the Confederate General Finnegan would send a flag of truce to Colonel Higginson, warning him to send all women and children out of the city and threaten to bombard it if it was not done. Our colonel allowed all to go who wished at first, but as General Finnegan grew more hostile and kept sending these communications for nearly a week, Colonel Higginson thought it not best or necessary to send any more out of the city, and so informed General Finnegan. This angered the general, for that night the rebels shelled directly toward Colonel Higginson's headquarters. The shelling was so heavy that the colonel told my captain to have me taken up into the town to a hotel, which was used as a hospital. And as my quarters were just in the rear of Colonel's, he was compelled to leave his also before the night was over. I expected every moment to be killed by a shell, but on arriving to the hospital, I knew I was safe, for the shells could not reach us there. It was plainly to be seen now, the ruse of the flag of truce coming so often for us. The bearer was evidently a spy, getting the location of the headquarters, etc., for the shells were sent too accurately to be at random. I learned to handle a musket very well while in the regiment, and could shoot straight and often hit the target. I assisted in cleaning the guns and used to fire them off to see if the cartridges were dry before cleaning and reloading each day. I thought this was great fun. I was also able to take a gun all apart and put it together again. Our boys would say to me sometimes, "Mrs. King, why is it you are so kind to us? You treat us just as you do the boys in your own company." And I replied, "Well, all the boys in the other companies are the same to me as those in my company E. You're all doing the same duty, and I will do just the same for you." "Yes," they would say, "we know that, because you were the first woman we saw when we came into camp, and you took an interest in us boys ever since we've been here, and we are very grateful for all you do for us." When at Camp Shaw, I visited the hospital in Beaufort where I met Clara Barton. There were a number of sick and wounded soldiers there, and I went often to see the comrades. Miss Barton was always very cordial toward me, and I honored her for her devotion and care of those men. On Morris and other islands, Fort Wagner being only a mile from our camp, I went there 2 or 3 times a week and would go up on the ramparts to watch the gunners send their shells into Charleston, which they did every 15 minutes, and had a full view of the city from that point. Outside of the fort were many skulls lying about. I've often moved them to one side out of the path. The comrades and I would have quite a debate as to which side the men fought on. Some thought they were the skull of all boys, and others thought they were the enemies, but there was no definite way to know. It was never decided which could lay claim to them. They were a gruesome sight. Those fleshless heads and grinning jaws. But by this time I had become accustomed to worse things and did not feel as I might have earlier in my life in camp. It seems strange how our aversion to seeing suffering is overcome in war. How we are able to see the most sickening sights, such as men with their limbs blown off and mangled by the deadly shells, without a shudder. And instead of turning away, how we hurry to assist in alleviating their pain, bind up their wounds, and press the cool water to their parched lips with feelings only of sympathy and pity. Capture of Charleston. On February 28th, 1865, the remainder of the regiment were ordered to Charleston as there were signs of the rebels evacuating that city. Leaving Coal Island, we arrived in Charleston between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning and found the Rebs had set fire to the city and fled, leaving women and children behind to suffer and perish in the flames. The fire had been burning fiercely for a day and night. When we landed under a flag of truce, our regiment went to work assisting the citizens in subduing the flames. It was a terrible scene. For 3 or 4 days, the men fought the fire, saving the property and effects of the people, yet these white men and women could not tolerate our black Union soldiers, for many of them had formerly been their slaves. And although these brave men risked life and limb to assist them in their distress, men and even women would sneer and molest them whenever they met them. I had quarters assigned to me at the residence on South Battery Street, one of the most aristocratic parts of the city, where I was assisting in caring for the sick and injured comrades. After getting the fire under control, the regiment marched out to the racetrack, where they camped until March 12th, and when we were ordered to Savannah, Georgia. We arrived there on the 13th about 8 o'clock in the evening and marched out to Fairlawn near the A&G R&R, where we remained about 10 days. When we were ordered to Augusta, Georgia, where Captain Alexander Heasley of Company E was shot and killed by a Confederate. After his death, Lieutenant Parker was made captain of the company and was with us until the regiment was mustered out. He often told me about Massachusetts, but I had no thought at that time that I should ever see that state and stand in the cradle of liberty. The regiment remained in Augusta for 30 days when it was ordered to Hamburg, South Carolina, and then on to Charleston. It was while on their march through the country to the latter city that they came in contact with the bushwhackers, as the rebels were called, who hid in the bushes and would shoot the Union boys every chance they got. Other times they would conceal themselves in the cars used to transfer our soldiers, and when our boys, worn out and tired, would fall asleep, these men would come out from their hiding places and cut their throats. Several of our men were killed in this way, but it could not be found out who was committing these murders until one night one of the rebels was caught in the act, trying to cut the throat of a sleeping soldier. He was put under guard, court-martialed, and shot at Wall Hollow. First Lieutenant Jerome T. Furman and a number of soldiers were killed by these South Carolina bushwhackers at Wall Hollow. After this man was shot, however, the regiment marched through unmolested to Charleston. My dear friends, do we understand the meaning of war? Do we know or think of that war of 61? No, we do not. Only those brave soldiers and those who had occasion to be in it can realize what it was. I can and shall never forget that terrible war until my eyes close in death. The scenes are just as fresh in my mind today as in 61. I see now each scene, the roll call, the drum tap, lights out, the call at night when there was danger from the enemy, the double force of pickets, the cold and rain, how anxious I would be, not knowing what would happen before morning. Many times I would dress, not sure, but all would be captured. Other times I would stand at my tent door and try to see what was going on, because night was the time the rebels would try and get into our lines and capture some of the boys. It was mostly at night that our men went out for their scouts and often had a hand-to-hand fight with the rebels. And although our men came out sometimes with a few killed or wounded, none of them were ever captured. We do not, as the Black race, properly appreciate the old veterans, white or Black, as we ought to. I know what they went through, especially those Black men, for the Confederates had no mercy on them. Neither did they show any toward our white Union soldiers. I've seen the terrors of that war. I was the wife of one of those men who did not get a penny for 18 months for their services, only their rations and clothing. I cannot praise General David Hunter too highly, for he was the first man to arm the Black man in the beginning of 1862. We had a hard struggle to hold all those Southern divisions, and with so few men, so he applied to Congress. But the answer to him was, "Do not bother us," which was very discouraging. As the general needed more men to protect the islands and do garrison duty, he organized 2 companies. I look around now and see the comforts that our younger generation enjoy, and think of the blood that was shed to make these comforts possible for them, and see how little some of them appreciate the old soldiers. My heart burns within me at this want of appreciation. There are only a few of them left now, so let us all, as the ranks close, take a deeper interest in them. Let the younger generation take an interest also, and remember that it was through the efforts of those veterans that they and we, older ones, enjoy our liberty today. Thoughts on present conditions. Living here in Boston, where the Black man is given equal justice, I must say a word on the general treatment of my race, both in the North and South in this 20th century. I wonder if our white fellow men realize the true sense and meaning of brotherhood. For 200 years, we had toiled for them. The War of 1861 came and was ended, and we thought our race was forever free from bondage, and that the 2 races could live in unity with each other. But when we read almost every day of what is being done to my race by some whites in the South, I sometimes ask, was the war in vain? Has it brought freedom in the full sense of the word? Or has it not made our condition more hopeless? In this land of the free, we are burned, tortured, and denied a fair trial, murdered for any imaginary wrong conceived in the brain of the Negro-hating white man. How there is no redress for us from a government which promised to protect all under its flag. It seems a mystery to me. They say one flag, one nation, one country, indivisible. Is this true? Can we say this truthfully when one race is allowed to burn, hang, and inflict the most horrible torture weekly, monthly on another? No, we cannot sing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty." It is hollow mockery. The Southland laws are all on the side of the white, and they do just as they like to the Negro, whether in the right or not. I do not uphold my race when they do wrong. They ought to be punished, but the innocent are made to suffer as well as the guilty, and I hope the time will hasten when it will be stopped forever. Let us remember, God says, "He that sheds blood, his blood shall be required again." Now, I may not live to see it, but the time is approaching when the South will again have cause to repent for the blood it has shed of innocent Black men. For their blood cries out for vengeance. For the South still cherishes a hatred toward the Blacks, although there are some true Southern gentlemen left who abhor the stigma brought upon them and feel it very keenly, and I hope the day is not far distant when the two races will reside in peace in the Southland, and we will sing with sincere and truthful hearts, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Of thee I sing." I've been in many states and cities, and in each I have looked for liberty and justice, equal for the Black man as for the white. But it was not until I was within the borders of New England and reached old Massachusetts that I found it. Here is found liberty in the full sense of the word, liberty for the stranger within her gates, irrespective of race or creed, liberty and justice for all. We have before us still another problem to solve. With the close of the Spanish War and on the entrance of the Americans into Cuba, the same conditions confront us as the War of 1861 left. The Cubans are free, but it is a limited freedom. For prejudice deep-rooted has been brought to them, and a separation made between the white and Black Cubans, a thing that had never existed between them before. But today, there is the same intense hatred toward the Negro in Cuba that there is in some parts of this country. I helped to furnish and pack boxes to be sent to the soldiers in hospitals during the first part of the Spanish War. And there were Black soldiers there too. At the Battle of San Juan Hill, they were in the front, just as brave, loyal, and true as those other Black men who fought for freedom and the right, and yet their bravery and faithfulness were reluctantly acknowledged and praise grudgingly given. All we ask for is equal justice, the same that is accorded to all other races who come to this country of their free will, not forced, as we were, and are allowed to enjoy every privilege unrestricted while we are denied what is rightfully our own in a country which the labor of our forefathers helped to make it what it is. One thing I have noticed among my people in the South, they have accumulated a large amount of real estate, far surpassing the colored owners in the North, who seem to let their opportunities slip by them. Nearly all of Brownsville, a suburb of Savannah, is owned by colored people. And so it is in a great many other places throughout the state. And all that is needed is the protection of the law as citizens. In 1867, soon after the death of my father, who had served in a gunboat during the war, my mother opened a grocery store where she kept general merchandise always on hand. These she traded for cash or would exchange for crops of cotton, corn, or rice, which she would ship once a month to F.L. Lloyd and Company or Johnson Jackson in Savannah. These were colored merchants doing business on Bay Street in that city. Mother bought her first property, which contained 10 acres. She next purchased 50 acres of land. Then she had a chance to get a place with 700 acres of land, and she bought this. In 1870, Colonel Hamilton and Major Davendorf of Oswego, New York, came to the town and bought up a tract of land at a place called Doctortown and started a mill. Mrs. Devendorf heard of my mother, went to see her, and persuaded her to come live with her, assuring her she would be just one of the family. Mother went with her, but after a few months, she went to Doctortown, where she has been since and now owns the largest settlement there. All trains going to Florida pass her place just across the Altahama River. She is well known by both white and black. The people are fond of her and will not allow anyone to harm her. Mr. Devendorf sold out his place in 1880 and went back to New York, where he later died. Now, I read an article which said the ex-Confederate daughters had sent a petition to the manager of the local theaters in Tennessee to prohibit the performance of Uncle Tom's Cabin, claiming it was exaggerated, that is, the treatment of the slaves, and would have a very bad effect on the children who might see the drama. I paused and thought back a few years of the heart-rending scenes I have witnessed. I've seen many times when I was a mere girl, 30 or 40 men handcuffed, and as many women and children come every first Tuesday of every month from Mr. Wiley's trade office to the auction blocks, one of them being situated on Drayton Street in Court Lane and the other on Bryant Street near the Pulaski House. The route was down our principal street, Bull Street, to the courthouse, which was only a block from where I resided. All the people in those days got their water from the city pumps, which stood about a block apart throughout the city. The one we used to get water from was opposite the courthouse on Bull Street. I remember as if it were yesterday, seeing droves of Negroes going to be sold, and I often went to look at them. And I could hear the auctioneer very plainly from my house, auctioning these poor people off. Do these Confederate daughters ever send petitions to prohibit the atrocious lynchings and wholesale murdering and torture of the Negro? Do you ever hear of them fearing this would have a bad effect on the children? Which of these two, the drama or the present state of affairs, makes a degrading impression upon the minds of our young generation? In my opinion, it is not Uncle Tom's Cabin, but it should be the one that has caused the world to cry shame. It does not seem as if our land is yet civilized. It is like times long past, when rulers and high officers had to flee for their lives, and the Negro has been dealt with in the same way since that war by those he lived with and toiled for 200 years or more. And I do not condemn all the Caucasian race because the Negro is badly treated by a few of the race. No, for it had not been for the true whites assisted by God and the prayers of our forefathers, I should not be here today. There are still good friends in the Negro. Why, there are still thousands that have not bowed to Baal, so it is with us. Man thinks 200 years is a long time, and it is too, but it is only a week to God. And in his own time, I shall not live to see the day, but it will come. The South will be like the North. And when it comes, it will be prized higher than we prize the North today. God is just. When he created man, he made him in his image and never intended one should misuse the other. All men are born free and equal in his sight. I am pleased to know it, this writing, that the officers and comrades of my regiment stand ready to render me assistance whenever required. It seems like bread cast upon the water, and it has returned after many days when it is most needed. I've received letters from some of the comrades since we parted in 1866, with expressions of gratitude and thanks to me for teaching them their first letters. One of them, Peter Wagall, is a minister in Jacksonville, Florida. Another is in the government service at Washington, D.C. Others are in Darien and Savannah, Georgia, and all are doing well. There are many people who do not know what some of the colored women did during the war. There were hundreds of them who assisted the Union soldiers by hiding them and helping them to escape. Many were punished for taking food to the prison stockades for the prisoners. When I went into Savannah in 1865, I was told of one of these stockades, which was in the suburbs of the city, and they said it was an awful place. The Union soldiers were in it worse than pigs, without any shelter from sun or storm, and the colored women would take food there at night and pass it to them through the holes in the fence. The soldiers were starving, and these women did all they could towards relieving those men, although they knew the penalty should they be caught giving them aid. Others assisted in various ways in the Union Army. These things should be kept history before the people. There has never been a greater war in the United States than the one of 1861, where so many lives were lost, not men alone, but noble women as well. Let us not forget that terrible war. Our brave soldiers who were thrown into Andersonville and Libby Pit prisons, the awful agony they went through, and the most brutal treatment they received in those lonesome dens, the worst ever given human beings. And if the white soldiers were subjected to such treatment, what must have been the horrors inflicted on the Negro soldiers in their prison pens? Can we forget those cruelties? No. Though we try to forgive and say no North, no South, and hope to see it in reality before the last comrade passes away.
That's the end of our dramatic presentation this evening. Thank you so much for your attention. If we were in a live setting all together, I know there would be uproarious applause for Tracie. All she has is Charlene and me expressing our immense thanks for jumping into the breach and saving the day and bringing your immense talents and just presence to this reading. Thank you so much, Tracie. I'm so touched by
you, Brian. Theater of War. Anything for you guys.
every time you say yes, and I'm so grateful to that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to put you in the audience, but as we do, we say goodbye to Tracie with immense thanks. We're going to start bringing up our panelists onto the screen, and as we bring our panelists up onto the screen and we put Tracie in the audience, Charlene and I are going to plant the first seed of the first question that we're going to ask you as an audience. So we'd love for you as the audience to think about this question and then be ready when we get to the discussion to jump right in the same way that Tracie did when she got the call from me yesterday. Could you save the day and read Susie King Taylor's memoir for this audience? So here's the question we'd love you to think about. Charlene will restate it when we get past the panel. Now that you've heard Tracie going for broke with minimal rehearsal, making beautiful sense of Susie King Taylor's words and story, bringing it alive for us tonight. You know, the text was written in 1902 or published in 1902, and it was written about her time starting at age 14 during the Civil War, during her service as a nurse and as many other things in the Union Army. In spite of the distance of time and in spite of the distance of culture, and people from outside the South I know are tuning in from all over the country and the world, what spoke to you in the reading tonight? What resonated with you in Susie King Taylor's words and story? What touched you? What was true? So we're going to return to the audience in a few minutes. But before we do, we're going to go first to our panelists who are slowly but surely joining us on screen. And Barbara, since you are the first to join us, the real Barbara, we'll go to you if you don't mind introducing yourself and launching directly into your responses after introducing yourself. We'd be grateful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Barbara Ward. I am a former Air Force nurse. I served during the Vietnam War stateside, and I reside in the DC area. What resonated with me, I think it's really sad as I sit here and listen to the things that were shared from the memoir, that we have to sit and think that a lot of what happened then, it's not that different today for Black soldiers. And I say that in terms of that right now, the Department of Veterans Affairs has a lawsuit that is based on the fact that so many Black veterans have been either denied benefits or their disability ratings are significantly lower than their white counterparts. So that resonates with me because that's really current. And I was listening in on the VA Secretary's presentation today about how they plan to address that issue. But I think overall, I could just relate, having been a nurse in the Air Force, having taken care of wounded soldiers, and remembering what that was like. It's just one of those things that you never forget. And then when you hear someone else talk about it, then it's like you have this flashback. Even though I did not serve in Vietnam, I had the pleasure of taking care of soldiers, wounded soldiers, as they came back and stateside for many, many months. So they became actually like a family member. So I basically just feel sadness in a way, because so much of what her experiences were, we still see that going on today. I think in terms of having a Black veteran driving his car in the state of Virginia, being pulled over by police officers, he's in his uniform. And even though he says, you know, what did I do? He ends up being brutalized. And it goes back to what she said, that the country just does not want to acknowledge and say thank you for the service that and the sacrifices that our soldiers made then and continue to make today. So those are my preliminary thoughts for what resonated with me.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate you going first. And it's so powerful to hear you from your perspective, and also to have a Vietnam era nurse participating in the conversation. I don't know, Charlene, if you want to respond, but I just want to say that it feels like nurses and veterans are sacred, and as a culture, as a country, that's a widely held value. But what you point out, and what Susie King Taylor points out, and what's also been borne out in the last 3 years with the COVID crisis, is that the social contract doesn't always hold up. And I feel like Susie King Taylor is really calling that out in a beautiful way. And what I loved and was touched most by Tracie's performance was the tenderness with which she spoke about the boys that she served.
Yes.
And I hear that in your voice as well, as you speak about the people that you've served, men and women. And I'm grateful to you. Charlene, if you want to jump in at any time, please. Yeah.
One thing I noticed in the memoirs, she intermingled boys with men. So they were men, but she had that affection when she called them boys. They meant something to her. I didn't serve, but I have had the opportunity to take care of veterans, but I only find out they're veterans when they start talking to me, because in healthcare, unfortunately, we kind of dehumanize people. We put them in a gown, we put them in clothes that's no longer theirs, they put them in a bed that's not theirs, and we don't know who they are. We don't know what they've done for us until we start talking to them. And I think that's a sad part of our healthcare. So Barbara, thank you for reminding me of the people that I take care of. Appreciate what you
You're
said.
welcome.
Thank you so much. Well, before we go to Patricia, I just want to also acknowledge Cinda Rushton, who's on the screen with us. Cinda is the nurse who made this whole initiative possible by hounding Theater of War Productions and saying nurses need to have their conversation. They need to be front and center. They need to have a platform. Please make one with us. And so Cinda's joined us tonight as well, and she's going to be part of this conversation. But I just want to acknowledge Cinda's presence and thank her for being with us. Patricia, if you don't mind going next, over to you.
Yes. First of all, I am really honored to be a part of this. It's really very, very, very moving. And I'm sorry that Barbara went first, because she took some of the words out of my mouth, some of the things that I had planned to say. But my name is Patricia Jackson Kelly, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. And I got my nurse beginning at Bellevue Hospital in New York. I can look at this from two different perspectives, because I was a nurse in the military and I also worked at the VA hospital. So I was able to take care of active duty members of the force, and as well as veterans. And one of the things that resonated most with me is when she talked about the sense of the U.S. appreciation in the veterans. And I immediately thought about my Vietnam sisters and brothers who returned from the war and was treated so horribly. So that was one of the things that stood out really. And the fact that she said that God see all of us, men and women, as being free. And as Barbara stated, that is far from the truth. And we have a lot of to do as far as fulfilling that role. Very little thought is given to the sisters that served in the military. So it would be an honor to have a square named after Susan. So that is my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate leading with the Vietnam War because there was a betrayal there. There was a betrayal of what's right that happened to those who returned. And it's something we're still paying for as a country. It also, I feel like, has opened up a lot of dialogue in this country. Like when we go to other countries and they didn't pass through that crucible, they're not able to talk about the betrayal as much as we're talking about it now. So I wish it hadn't happened, but I'm also grateful we can talk about it. But then you attuned me as I'm listening to it and that was a betrayal in the Vietnam. I don't mean to cast that off and put it aside. We can talk about that tonight. But then the betrayal that she's describing of a volunteer colored regiment that wasn't even paid during its time by the late 19th, early 20th century, feeling that the war might have been in vain and not only not being remembered, but being, well, brutalized in some of the ways that were already brought into the room by Barbara by talking about the soldier in Virginia. So, you know, the betrayal is the wound that cuts the deepest. And there was a betrayal in the Vietnam War, but there's also a betrayal that happened after the Civil War, especially to those troops who served. Forget the betrayal of slavery. We can't, you know, that's a wound that we need to talk about as well. But I appreciate that you and Susie King Taylor focus us on the Black veterans' experience after the war, by way of the Vietnam experience. Thank you so much. Teresa, thanks for your patience. If you don't mind going next, we'd be grateful. But you are muted, so unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Fleming, and I am a registered nurse at the Columbia VA Healthcare System in Columbia, South Carolina. I am a registered nurse. I'm also a veteran and served in Operation Desert Shield and Storm. And much of what Mrs. Susie King Taylor said really parallels with what we still experience today, as much as Mrs. Jackson Kelly stated as well. I felt sadness. I felt appreciation for Mrs. Susie King Taylor and how, in spite of not being appropriately compensated, she did what nurses still do today. We take care of patients. It's not about a dollar. It's about just taking care of veterans. And having served, for me, it's a pleasure to take care of veterans because we do have something in common. And what we realize is a lot of what they've experienced, we as nurses have experienced also. But I think I felt some overall sadness just in hearing what Mrs. Susie King Taylor accomplished and did in spite of how she was treated. So saddened, but it's just like I have more research to do now as a result. And I think we just all need to become a voice to try to make a difference and bring light to the disparities and just to make a difference for all veterans, not necessarily just Black veterans, but for all veterans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you. I'm registering the sadness that's coming across, and you know, grateful that you all would give. I know it takes energy to be on screen and be sad about something you just heard, but I'm also hoping that, you know, leading with sisters Pat and Roz, and the sort of celebration of Susie King Taylor's life and message that's happening in Savannah, that we can do both. We can be sad and we can also celebrate and interrogate at the same time. And I appreciate all of you did all of those things in your comments, and I'm grateful to everything you said. Thank you. Tammy, you're next on my screen. Over to you. Oh, we're not hearing you, Tammy. So sorry. There you go.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Tammy Finney, DNP, and I have been a nurse, registered nurse for 33 years and currently in Columbia, South Carolina, and I have the awesome honor of serving veterans. This powerful reading and opportunity to be a part of this resonated with me on so many different levels. First of all, there was sadness, and then the flip side of that was appreciation and honor, because to hear about the amazing attributes that she possessed, I mean, as an educator, social worker, caregiver, advocate, servant leader, those are, you know, what we build our nursing careers on. And to know that I am within that profession, it really made me feel proud. But the flip side of that for me was hearing how she identified. This was not taught. This is something that was kept, that, you know, you had Black women, African-American women who were doing so much, but none of this was provided as a part of history. And Black history is a part of American history. And that's the part that really is so disturbing about that, because as we are talking about within the profession of caring for individuals, all that she accomplished, all that she was able to do, it seems as though it was minimized by others. But thank God she was willing to actually put this in writing for us to be able to hold on to this for decades to come. I think that when we look at this and we're talking about how it impacts, when we look at the healthcare disparities that continue now, not only when we're talking about individuals who are veterans, but those who aren't veterans, it continues, and it is, in my professional opinion, something that is getting worse, because as the Affordable Care Act, now we have more minorities that are seeking care, but do we have the representation of the individuals that are within the healthcare profession that actually allow them to have a better understanding of different cultures, so that they are able to move forward with their healthcare? And so it just opens up so much that we can think about. And as Teresa said, you know, there's so much more that we can do. We have to be that voice. And I think that this is given, as myself, and I believe I speak for everyone on here, an opportunity to have that re-energized spirit to move forward, to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Charlene, yeah.
Tammy, thank you. You mentioned Black history is part of American history. You're absolutely correct. It's something that for a while isn't really taught. It's not they don't delve deep into it. They sort of skim over it. Like until recently, I didn't even know about was Juneteenth until several years ago. That was just local. People heard it as an oral history. Now it's national. Teresa, thank you so much. You remind me that nurses, we are a family and we cover so much. As a nurse, you're not just a nurse, you are a provider, you're an educator, you're a veteran. You ladies, thank you for reminding me what nursing's about. I appreciate everything that you guys have contributed so far.
Thank you so much, Charlene. And Tammy, I was struck by what you said about this healthcare disparity, because obviously there's so many ways that the overt racism and brutalization of, people of color in the Jim Crow South and even in the North, has now transformed into covert systems of systemic oppression and structures that are just built into our institutions in ways that in many ways, I think Susie King Taylor was almost prophetic about in the way she was calling it out in 1902. And of course, Frederick Douglass, another project we do, speaks very explicitly to what he sees in the future, and the future is now. And healthcare disparity is part of that. We skipped because we didn't have time, we wanted to get to the discussion, a final chapter in the book where she talks and with immense presence and vulnerability about going back to the South. She went back to the South to retrieve her dying son, and she wanted to bring him essentially to her home to die, but she couldn't transport him from the South back to the North because there was no way they would be given passage in anything but the third class quarters, and it was not possible for him to and so I was thinking about that as you were speaking, that like she lived firsthand the experience of healthcare disparity around end of life care for her own son in a way that maybe hasn't changed, or certainly hasn't changed enough in the century that's passed. And I'm grateful to you for bringing it into the room. And
Absolutely. I just want to make one other point when you were talking about that. You know, she had so much hope for the South. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, we talk about and we act as if inclusion, diversity, and equity is some, you know, newfound term that we can use. But I mean, even she talked about it back then. And she said, you know, it's not just the whites, it's the blacks. You know, she talked about, you know, just as it was stated about God seeing everyone as being free. But in South Carolina, we are one of the 3 states that still do not have hate crime law.
I appreciate you naming that. I was struck listening to Tracie's rendition at the end, that last line, can we forget those cruelties? No, though we try to forgive and say no north or south. We try to say no north and no south and hope that in reality, hope to see it in reality before the last comrade passes away. Yeah, that's a vision of hope that still hasn't come to fruition. And we've had many more wars and many more comrades pass away since that time. And it raises the question, will we ever get there? And how do we get there? I'm thankful to you for bringing all that into the room. Keturah, thank you so much for your patience. Last but not least, we'll come down to you, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, introducing yourself, and offering us your response. Oh,
sure, Barb. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. I am I've been a VA nurse for 20 plus years, and I'm also a veteran, Air Force veteran, ER trauma background. This was, this reading, it was wonderful to hear, but it was also very difficult to listen to. One of the statements that she read, and I took notes because I know I wouldn't forget it, where she mentioned that her hope was that one day the South will be like the North. And the sad reality is that it appears the opposite has occurred. We don't really see the continuance of the maybe the ideals and the experience that she had in the North. It seems that the narrative was so controlled by the South that we now have those sections of the country that may not have even really been states at the time, that we see this white supremacy that is so evident in all of our structures. One of the things she said about the rebels about in Jacksonville, how they had no mercy or sympathy for us. There's the objectification, not seeing as human, not seeing the humanity of another person that, as has been mentioned already, largely contributes to our disparities in so many different things, whether it's home ownership, healthcare, so many different things that, as you have conversations inside the African American community and as allies have conversations with us, and you realize the different processes we go through to try to assure some type of semblance of equality or, quality of care, the things we go through, the people we bring with us, the processes, that have not changed. And I do feel her when she said, was this war in vain? Because there was hope that things would be so much different. And yes, there are things that are so much better. And the one last thing I did want to quote from her that she mentioned was one of the officers, Union officers. She called him a thorough gentleman and a staunch friend to my race. And I, today we just call you allies. But I love the way she described these people, that she felt that they valued her and other African Americans as humans and saw the contributions they were giving. And I will probably be using that quote somewhere in the near future. But yes, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this.
Thank you so much, Katura. Thank you for waiting and being last, but by no means least, she ends with saying no North, no South, or the South becomes like the North. And then we hear her talking about her time in Boston, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the experiences of people of color living in the North now. And I'm glad you named it and brought it into the room early, because it would be silly for us to act like this is some kind of binary between the North and the South anymore. It's more like the North became like the South, and not vice versa. And so I'm glad you said it. And I appreciate what you said about, I was touched by the way she spoke about her allies and friends as well. She was an expansive human being, clearly, given what she had been through, to speak of people who may have been complicit in that suffering up until the war, in those ways, with such tenderness. Teresa, you had your hand up. So before we go out to the audience, we'll go over to you, but maybe as Teresa's talking, we can bring up the Susie King Taylor house, because we're going to go to them after Teresa. Teresa.
Actually, I did not intend to do that, but
okay.
I just wanted to just say thank you. Thank you for allowing to have me be a part of this. I'm just very grateful, and I'm honored to know that Susie King Taylor actually paved the way for us as healthcare providers. So thank you for the opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And sometimes, as I said, the technological accidents end up being the thing that makes the whole performance and discussion come together. So I'm glad you tripped upon your hand, the raise your hand function. Anyone else who wants to do that, you're more than welcome. So I see we brought the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee up, and I know they have some microphones in the room, and we're now going to go out to the larger audience. I wanted, before doing that, just simply thank our amazing panelists. If we were in a live setting all together, there'd be an uproarious round of applause for your contributions. It is no small thing to get up and talk about these things that are hard and make people sad and are hard to watch and listen to. And it's an act of service to do it. And I just want to thank you. And if we were in a live setting, we'd be applauding uproariously and thanking you for your candor and for showing us the way forward. And at any point during a larger discussion in the fleeting time we have left together, if you want to jump back in, I hope that you will. You have just raise your hand or jump right back into the conversation whenever you feel so moved. But now that we have the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee up on the screen, before we start going out to the larger audience, we just want to sort of restate the question we started with a second ago. I don't know, Charlene, if you want to restate it, about what touched people and what was true, but maybe in your own words, you could deliver it. And then we'll go to anybody at the Susie King Taylor House who wants to kick off the conversation with their responses. Charlene.
Well, I do have one question.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put this out there. In 2022, the American Nurses Association reported that there was a substantial problem within nursing, racism, and we get used to it, and not in a good way. Susie King Taylor wrote, "They were a gruesome sight, those fleshless heads and grinning jaws. But by this time, I had become accustomed to worse things and did not feel as I might have early in my camp life." My question to you, what of Susie King Taylor's words feel true to you? How do you connect with this statement? What resonates with you?
Thank you so much, Charlene, for making right out of the gates, getting to the heart of the text and putting it right in front of us. I never thought about it in those terms when she said, the way you framed them, the difference between seeing gruesome sights, but having grown accustomed to worse things, those worse things maybe not being the sights, but being something else, lived experiences. So that resonates deeply. I know other people will want to speak to it. We want to go to the folks in Savannah first, since you inspired us to do this, and maybe someone has the mic in their hand and the camera will go. There you are, right there, sir. If you wouldn't mind responding, what spoke to you tonight? What resonated with you? What touched you?
I'm Jamie Maury. I'm a Vietnam vet. I was drafted in 1967, went through infantry officer training and went to Vietnam. I was lucky I didn't have to lead combat troops, but I experienced a lot of it through the vicarious loss of friends and colleagues and being in mortar attacks. War is the God. No, what am I trying to say? It's just Satan in its complete manifestation. Susie King Taylor is a model for courage, absolute bravery. I've never seen the kind of bravery and dedication that I witnessed in reading her memoir and having worked with this coalition in Savannah. And I have worked in the VA. I later became a clinical social worker and worked in the VA, and then most recently became an ordained Episcopal priest and worked with the homeless. And I had countless number of veterans in my congregation. But she stands out. She really stands out, and I cannot applaud her more and the effort that Sister Pat and Roz and Peggy and everyone here have come together to lift her up. She needs to be memorialized, and I'm so proud that there's a school here named for her, and I hope this message that we've heard tonight will be brought to every school. And thank God we're not in Florida.
Well, way to throw the gauntlet on the ground. I appreciate that so much. So powerful to hear from a veteran right out of the gates who essentially says, Susie King Taylor is the bravest person I've ever encountered. That's not a small statement given what you, I'm sure, have experienced in war, and we're grateful to you for saying it and for your work in the coalition. Someone else has the mic in the room. We'll go over to you, ma'am, right? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ann Fenstermacher, and I think this is a remarkable, rare opportunity for Savannah to lift up Susie King Taylor, to give her the acknowledgement that we all would know if her name was Clara Barton. She knew Clara Barton. If she was a white woman and had done all the things with a firsthand account of her story, we would know about her. And it's time that Savannah claim her. How lucky we are that she is one of us and that she could be in our square and tell her story. There are so many adjectives to ascribe to her is beyond my ken, but it was a remarkable reminiscence. And I hope that this book becomes in everybody's home here in Savannah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's so powerful to hear from such a passionate group in Savannah who's working to uphold and honor Susie King Taylor's name and legacy. And I love hearing from you after hearing from these incredible nurses and veterans as well. With our events, we're not trying to like make it all make sense and everyone perfectly in one space. It's kind of like we can hear each other's interpretations and passion, and we can hear each other's interpretations and be present with each other, and this container can hold it all. And so it's really lovely to hear what this has stirred in Savannah. I feel like there's someone with a microphone in their hand in Savannah. Is there? Yes, over to you, please. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Charlene Bowles, and though I'm not a veteran or a nurse, I do have service members and nurses in my family that I'm very close to. And I was very fortunate enough to stumble upon this by accident. And I want to say that there was so much that hearing the reading, that powerful reading evoked. First, I want to say that, yes, of course, there's sadness whenever someone references a memoir or talk about Blacks in America. But another thing is awareness. There is so much awareness reading her story, listening to her story brings to those of us who work so closely with nurses and veterans. Sometimes things are right in your face and you don't realize the impact that people have on others or what they've actually gone through. So I appreciate that about the reading. And also there is a feeling of wonderful hope. Though she suffered so many disparities and seen so many bad things, she never gave up. She stayed true to herself. She stayed true to her friends and her purpose. So I'm really grateful to all of you for the sacrifices you've made. And I thank you for the opportunity to be able to be here and sharing this with you and speak on this wonderful platform to, highlight Susie King Taylor.
Thank you so much. Our favorite audience members are ones who come accidentally to the space. And so it's wonderful to hear your perspective as well, because we all have agendas, but to come accidentally and to be moved in that way is really powerful. Is there one more person in the Susie King Taylor Center we can hear from? Then we'll move back to you in a second. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am. Please, go right ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryan. I'm an academician. I'm also trained in trauma. And I think the fact that resonated most with me was the trauma and the clarity with which Susan B. Taylor discussed the trauma of not only the soldiers, but she really let us in to her own trauma. And one of the things I go around the country talking about is don't re-traumatize the traumatized. And so we got a chance to hear her story. And the sad thing is that we are still being traumatized. We are a traumatized community, particularly here in Savannah. And I love what you said. We need to honor and lift that up. And if she had been a white woman, it would already be an infamous story, right? And the fact that there needs to be so much of a fight and a push to acknowledge her is sad. And it reignites or it re-invites the trauma, continually, the trauma of neglect, the trauma of resistance to accept a really strong, powerful, courageous, brave woman and all that she had to do. So us and we who are in Savannah, let us not continue to re-traumatize the traumatized.
Thank you.
Say her name.
Say her name. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we're going to, for those in the Susie King Taylor House, if you have a hand up, we're going to come back to you, but we want to bring in some more folks from across the country into this conversation. And I promise, and the world, I promise we will come back, especially if there's time. We want to hear from more folks in Savannah, I love the hyper local relevance of Susie King Taylor. And I also love the global relevance as we have people tuning in from all over the planet participating. J. Taylor Harden, you've had your hand up for some time. You're our first digital audience member to join us on your own personal device. We'd love to hear from you. What touched you? What spoke to you? What was true? Or in some way, did you relate to what Charlene threw into the room when she spoke about Susie King Taylor's statement about becoming accustomed to worse things? Over to you.
Well, good evening. My name is J. Taylor Harden, and so you can imagine I'm searching my genealogy to see if there's a connection along the Taylor line. I am a Vietnam era veteran, United States Air Force flight nurse, veteran, having worked at the VA. I'm an educator and a research scientist, having spent most of my career at the National Institutes of Health. What really touched me, and a message of hope that I think we need to recommit ourselves to across the nation. And it started from the very beginning of the reading and manifested throughout the presentation, is that without that formal education and learning to read and write, Susie King Taylor would not have been able to accomplish many of the things that she did. We need to ensure that our schools, that our communities, that we're continuing to reach back and try to make sure that our children understand the value You know, I'm fond of saying, and I have it on my business cards, that health is indeed the greatest wealth. But right along with keeping yourself healthy is being educated. And people have said time and time again, many, many truths. If you want to hide a secret, put it in a book, because people will not endeavor. So I applaud, number one, this committee for bringing all of this to life and providing it internationally. If I didn't say, I'm calling from Northern Virginia, Fairfax Station, Virginia, and it has had its issues, and the reference to the young military member that was stopped and brutalized in his car for no reason, that happened in the state of Virginia. We're having killings every day. And so the trauma continues, but I guess the greatest hope and the thing that we were all able to do, despite the challenges before us, is that we hung in there and we learned to read and we learned to write. You won't make it successfully in nursing without those skills. They'll weed you out of the program so fast your head will spin. And I know every nurse on the line can attest to that. So I am just pleased to be a part of this group, and to my colleagues and contemporaries in nursing, I salute you. And I am just so proud of the entirety of this project, and have been thinking how my husband and I might work through my alumni to establish at least a scholarship in the name. So we can bring greater visibility. You know, we have a lot of Eliza Mahoney scholarships in almost every school of nursing across the nation. I'd like to see that matched with some Susie King Taylor scholarships. Thank you for the opportunity to address the group. Blessings to each of you.
Thank you so much. Charlene, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Taylor. I appreciate all that you've said. This kind of refers back to, I think, what Tammy had said, talking about Black history being part of American history. That all ties in with the inequities, disparities, almost like setting you up for failure back then. So it's like education is key, but sometimes even having access to that education, you're set up to not have access. I started my degree, my further education later in life, because moved to this country later in life, and I literally did not know how to access it. I knew my European American colleagues were able to access it much easier than I was. So we've got a long way to go. You're absolutely right. Education is the key. I almost feel like back in the day, it was easier for us to get that education because we educated each other. Now it seems like there are blocks put in our way, but hopefully with projects like this, we can actually maybe break down some of those barriers and get the education to those who need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Actually, I wanted, Charlene, to ask you to talk about that other question you had prepared, because I feel like it speaks to this really, this moment in the dialogue about the underestimation of Susie King Taylor in spite of her education. And you drafted a question, and I'd love you to throw it out to the audience. Just to be clear, I'm asking Charlene just to throw questions out. You can answer them, you can ignore them, you can assimilate them all to one perfect answer, which many people probably will. But we just want to keep perturbing the conversation a little bit with these questions. And I was so moved when Charlene posed some of these questions to me after reading the text. So Charlene, would you mind giving us that question?
Of course. So having a personal history encompasses travel, living overseas, attempting to be well-versed, sounding different, or pursuing further education. It is sometimes seen as unusual or novel, even greeted with disbelief and often surprise. Like, oh, you're going for your master's? So this passage spoke to me. This is what Susie King wrote. He asked if I could read. I said, yes. Can you write? He next asked, yes, I can do that also. I replied. And as if he had some doubts of my answers, he handed me a book and a pencil and told me to write my name and where I was from. He was surprised at my accomplishments. He said, "You seem to be so different from the other colored people who came from the same place you did." "No," I replied. "The only difference is they were reared in the country and I in the city." So after listening to those words, what feelings or thoughts are stirred within you? What is your gut reaction to these words?
Thank you so much. We're going to let that float for a second. Well, maybe Tammy, if you want to jump in, because I saw your hand come up, and then we'll go to Tashma, because I know Tashma's been waiting for some time. But Tammy, go right ahead. Can you? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the stereotype, it continues. And, I think about having the opportunity to do presentations and at the end hearing comments instead of understanding that the education or the topic that's being discussed, of hearing things such as "you are so well versed" or "you spoke so well." Those are not compliments. And so having being in 2023, it hasn't stopped. And when you talk about, before the education, it seems as though it was so much easier. I think because there weren't as many that were pursuing the education, therefore the threat was not there. And so as a result of that, it is what can we put in, what barriers, what can we put in the way to ensure that we can slow this down or totally remove it, of being able to have opportunities for education. And that includes with the colleges and universities with affirmative action.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And obviously a very timely and apt statement at the end, given what the Supreme Court is currently debating. Tashma, you've been waiting for some time. We want to go to you, and I appreciate you coming back and joining us after being with us just a month ago with another nurse, Antigone. Over to you.
I would just want to say thank you for that wonderful reading first. The second thing I want to say is it was a reminder of the strength, the courage, the resiliency from which we come, the shoulders that we are able to stand on today. And the passage that you read, Ms. Charlene, shook my soul. And it did because I can remember the first time I stood in front of a group of people to speak at a nursing research day. And the comment was, "I had no idea you knew how to speak." As a master's prepared nurse in a hospital with a room full of people, the comment was, "I was impressed that you knew how to articulate the research and information for which you are the expert." And I was not impressed, I was appalled. And when people find out that I have a doctorate, a PhD in nursing at 37 years old, I have had people do the research to verify my credentials because they could not believe it. So the barriers are real. And I spend a lot of time trying to influence and encourage more of us to pursue those degrees, because it seems to be such a shock and a surprise when you write those letters and initials before and after your name. So that's what I think of that passage. And I think we have so far to go before we can say it's not a surprise, it's not a shock, and before it becomes the expectation rather than the exception.
Thank you so much, Tasha. I'm so glad you came back. Thank you. And I think you also mentioned, I usually don't ask follow-up questions, but you had a relative who was a nurse in South Carolina in the last century, and I wanted to not gloss that connection.
I can tell you, my great-great-great-grandmother was a registered nurse in South Carolina who did not know how to read. She delivered the babies all over the county in rural Dorchester County, South Carolina.
She was the first one in our family born outside of slavery in 1870. And my grandmother today still lives on the land that was given to her as a free woman. And it is amazing to be able to go and sit at her headstone as a registered nurse today of almost 20 years and only imagine the things that she experienced and went through, the things that Susie King Taylor went through as a nurse and had to prove that she was fit to take care of the people for which she was trained.
Thank you, Tashma. I think you just answered all the questions at once, like I thought you might. So thank you so much for threading the needle so perfectly by way of your great-great-grandmother's story. I'm so moved. Charlene, did you want to respond to Tashma?
Just to reiterate the having to prove yourself every single time. It's like every single interaction, you have to prove that you're a nurse, that you know what you're doing every single time. Every interaction. It's not even a daily thing. Every interaction. It's exhausting. Tashma, thank you. Sorry, Dr. Tashma.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Just one quick thought. The other thing you mentioned, Tashma, that I really appreciated was property ownership, and it's come up a couple of different times, and it comes up in the text as well. Someone was mentioning a second ago also, like the Colonel's response to Susie King Taylor was a surprise more than anything else, but this because it's not something he had seen before. But by the time it started becoming more common, then structures and systems started being put in place so it wouldn't be more common. And I was listening, thinking about how Susie King Taylor's mother was able to accrue 700 acres of land, and how those accruals of intergenerational wealth and land that have been, expected, a common expectation of white citizens in the United States, that we can accrue wealth and pass it down, accrue land, that she's speaking about this very specific moment during Reconstruction where it was possible for African Americans in the South to accrue land at that scale that quickly, but how quickly that was repealed. And to make these two connections between education and land ownership that are at the center of this story. I know we're going to go back to the Susie King Taylor house. So those of you who had your hand up earlier, please be ready, because we want to come back there and hear from anyone else is there. But at present, we also have Margie, who's been waiting for some time on the screen. Margie, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I've attended several theater of war productions and am always impressed, and I always particularly appreciate the richness of the conversation afterwards, this being no exception. I would have loved to have been a nurse, but I was lousy in chemistry, so I became a therapist instead. My favorite aunt was an Army nurse in World War II, although I never heard her really talk about her experiences, except to the point where those of you who are from the DC area will appreciate. I'm in DC. My aunt was stationed at St. Elizabeth's, which was the state equivalent of a psychiatric hospital. And my uncle, before they were married, had to pick her up there for dates. So that was always a family lore. But I also have seen within the nursing profession, I worked in a psychiatric hospital where my boss was a nurse who believed that nurses were the only capable people of any color. She happened to be white British, and very much she put nurses at a level that was beyond realistic. I absolutely agree and applaud nurses, but she made it that they were higher in the hierarchy than even the psychiatrists, but that was her own personal issue. Apropos of several other things that, and I think it's interesting that the quotes that other speakers have pointed out from the wonderful recitation are the same ones that touched me. The one about the Colonel making Susie Taylor King write her name. I worked in the equivalent of a Woolworths in my 20s, and my boss was a very proud, and I will use a term I hope does not offend anyone, redneck 8th grade graduate one of my coworkers was a, a doctoral student from Nigeria. And I remember my boss saying very specifically, oh, no, that doesn't count because that's from over there. And, you know, this was many years ago, but to this day, there are many Mrs. Clark still around. I have no delusions about that. Also, the quote that was referenced about essentially the allies. I consider myself an ally. I have had friends call me an ally. So what I'm about to say comes from a place of wanting to not offend, but I feel like I need to say that while there is undeniable horrendous history perpetrated by white people, and it needs to be addressed currently as well and as historically, there is a tendency to demonize all white people. And an example I want to give of that is that when Trayvon Martin was killed, that affected me even more deeply than some of the other shootings. He was the same age as my daughter. He could have been her boyfriend, her best friend. And I remember going to one of the vigils and the speaker saying, white people should be ashamed of George Zimmerman. And I remember thinking, I was horrified by him. I was reviled by him. I was devastated by what he did, but I'm not ashamed of him, because in order for me to be ashamed of him, I would have to feel a kinship with him. And I don't. Not all white people are George Zimmerman. And I'm not accusing anyone on this panel of stating that or feeling that, but there is a tendency to demonize all whites. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie, for bringing all that into the room and for your perspective. There are plenty of people, I'm sure, here who will take up what you said and maybe respond to it in their own terms, but I'm grateful that you joined us again. I think there's room in our space to contain all interpretations and all direct. If the exercise is to ask the audience to be present with their thoughts and feelings, then you know, we have to also acknowledge that those thoughts and feelings will be raw and present in the ways that you've just described and articulated. So I appreciate that, and others will respond, and we'll leave it open. But Jerem, I don't know if that's your name, Jerem, but that's what it says on the screen. You've been waiting for some time. We'll go over to you, and then I know there's some folks at the Susie King Taylor House waiting, and sadly our time is fleeting tonight, but we want to get to a few more people if we can. Jerem, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate being with this wonderful group tonight. I'm Dr. Jerry Milstead, and I've been a nurse for 66 years. I actually spent 10 years in South Carolina as a faculty member. At this age, I've seen everything you think, and yet not. But I think nurses have an opportunity here to educate the public. We can listen to each other. We hear each other's stories without revision, without revulsion. We can accept every story that I've heard here tonight. I understand that, not in the way that you understand it, but I acknowledge that you have had those horrible experiences, those wonderful experiences, and we need, as a profession, to educate the rest of the public. It's okay. We need that piece of history. We need history from our Asian friends, from our Native American friends, from my Irish side. I mean, truly, we have stories that have never been heard. It is not an all-white Anglo-Saxon world, and we're trying to get adjusted to that today. And it's painful, and it's true. But I think as nurses, we are trusted. We know how to listen to each other. We hear each other. We acknowledge the truth of each other. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity here to bring stories like this story tonight to light and champion it, celebrate all of our stories. And let's educate the rest of the world that it is a complex tapestry that we live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Charlene, I saw your hand. Yeah, please.
Like you were saying, thank you for that. Oh, much appreciated. I think the key is being able to tell these stories again and again and again. Susie King Taylor, being of colors and having experienced that again and again, not just saying me, but as a race or as a people of brown and black color, you are angry. There is no way sometimes you can't be angry. And it's the more stories that we tell and the more people listen, and they listen without judgment. Let us be angry. It's okay. I think the more stories we hear, the better it'll be, but we have to hear the stories because a lot of them are hidden. A lot of them aren't told until somebody finds out, oh, listen to this, listen to that. You know, something as simple as like the Oklahoma Tulsa, I never knew anything about it until it became public knowledge. We have to get all of those stories out so everybody hears them. I think that's the only time that healing will actually start.
So beautiful to connect this now back to the Susie King Taylor Center for Jubilee. Sisters Pat and Roz, their work and the coalition's work of making the marginalized and invisible history of slavery and of this country visible, and taking people on tours where they see the real history and have it narrated for them and are brought into contact with it. You know, we've had a lot of veterans say in our work on theater of war with military audiences, I'd talk about my traumatic experiences in war, the losses I've experienced, but it just takes, with civilians, I'd talk about it with them or those who didn't experience it, but it just takes so much energy. And I feel like when talking about, and we focused in on Black and brown nurses and veterans tonight because that's Susie King Taylor's story, but it can be refracted in many different directions. I guess what I think the act of service of Tracie's performance is it just sort of gives us, gives all of us participating in this conversation some energy that wasn't there before. And Susie is the person who sent us that energy from 1902, and it's been moving around this space we've created together in really beautiful ways, creating dialogue that wouldn't have happened had we not heard her words, by conveying this energy. And I just appreciate the energy of nurses saying to each other, and was just shared by one of the nurses who spoke. Nurses have in the chat with us here in the panelist view, we have such a wonderful opportunity to lead the concept of inclusivity. I love that, in this time of duress for nurses, that nurses can come together and say, no, actually, we can be the forefront of this conversation by listening to each other and accepting each other and hearing each other's truths. This is such a powerful inclusion in the Nurse Antigone trajectory for us as a project, to just stop and say that nurses can be the forefront of change when it comes to these issues that are being spoken about by Susie King Taylor in 1902 that are resonating so forcefully in the present moment. Thank you so much for waiting in the Susie King Taylor house for so long. We're going to go to you. I believe you have a microphone. Someone has a microphone. So yes, there you are. Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience. Over to you.
Thank you. My name is Imani Gunn. I'm from Savannah, Georgia. First of all, I would like to just give gratitude to all the nurses for you all speaking today. My dream is to be a nurse in the Air Force. And listening to everything that you all have said today has impacted me in a powerful way. I guess the raw feeling that I feel is anxiety. And sometimes I think to myself, do I want to take the step forward because of the things that I do know? Listening to you all on the panel today has done two things. It has encouraged me, but it also has wanted me to look for a mentor in this journey. For me to be able to listen to you all, to connect to you all, is something that's very powerful. It's not something that you see every day. Listening to Susie King Taylor's story, I was so apprehensive to actually read the book. I have the book, I still haven't read it because I felt that I would be so sad and I would turn away from it because of what actually happened. But just taking it all in today and being able to have a brand new perspective is a blessing for me. The question that I actually want to ask the nurses on panel is what pieces can you give me so that I can go forward with awareness and encouragement so that we do heal forward. We don't heal backwards, that we do heal forward.
I wonder if one of our nurses on the panel would like to take on this.
I would,
provocative-
I would like to take that on.
Please.
One thing that I can advise you is to stay focused. Know what you want. There are opportunities in the military, and you will hear a lot of negative things, but you need to stay focused on what you are there for. And you are on the right track when you said you are a mentor. Mentorship is very important. So you need to find someone who will kind of guide you along the way. So you have a lot of, you sound like you have a lot of potential there. So just stay focused and don't lose your tenacity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if any of our other nurses, Barbara, you have your hand up. Yeah, please.
Yes, I would just like to say to the young lady, I think that if you have the passion for being a nurse, then you just need to decide that nothing or no one, regardless of the barriers that you may face or the challenges that you may face, will prevent you from doing that. As far as joining the military, you also need to remember that you can join the military. It doesn't mean that you have to make a career of it, although it's an excellent career choice. I joined the military and went in on the buddy plan with nursing. One of my best friends from high school, we both went to nursing schools, and we joined the Air Force. And at the time during Vietnam, we only had to make a commitment of 2 years. I discovered by the end of 2 years that for different reasons, the Air Force just was not for me. Military was not for me. But as a result of that 2 years, I ended up having the military GI Bill that paid for my master's degree totally after I got a divorce from my husband. And I ended up buying my first home because of my military housing capabilities with the VA loan. So for the 2 years that I gave to serving my country, my God, I think the return on my investment was amazing. So I just think that the nursing profession is so rich, and there are so many different areas that you can go into. After I got my master's degree, I went into hospital administration. I worked in the health insurance industry for a while. I did consulting work. I mean, it's like there are just so many opportunities that you would pass up by not having the courage or being discouraged as other people make comments or things of that nature. Military has a lot of positives, and like anything in life, there's positives and there are negatives. But as Susan King Taylor demonstrated, you can overcome that.
Thank you so much. I know we have someone else in the Susie King Taylor House who and Center who wanted to speak, I believe. And I think the camera is going to that person, and that person has a mic. Okay, yes, over to you, please. Go right
Sure,
ahead.
just for a moment. This comment is for Imani, our wonderful Sister Pat Gunn's daughter. It was great to meet you today. Well, I think just within the past few months, I went for an appointment of my own at the VA, and it was routine. It was just to have a routine blood sample taken before a primary doctor appointment. But the person who took it, well, she and I started joking a little bit because a sticker on one of the cabinets said, she wears the boots, instead of like she wears the pants, but she wears the boots. So we were just joking about that. We really got into conversation and, talking with one another as women, as fellow vets. But what she started describing her prior work, because she's civilian now. She had spent maybe just over 20 years in the Army. But she was a medic. It might have been a medic, or I'd love to get my terms right. I'm trying to remember. But what she had to tell me as she winced, as she was remembering maybe trauma, secondary trauma, that her line of work had caused her to exit the military with. And so just as women, as fellow vets, we were almost ready to hold hands as she, as she was obviously still remembering some experiences that became etched into her mind. And I mean, as I was sitting here listening to the reading, and even as I regularly interact with Sister Roz Rouse, who is, our Susie King Taylor, Miss Roz will talk about how Susie King Taylor herself was free in her mind. She was clothed in her right mind, and I'm just thinking, oh, well, my experience, even my own psychological experience of some time in the military, cannot compare with the example that I hear that this woman through this memoir has set, and what she embodied, and how she lived. And so I'm almost I'll never offer or suggest that I could possibly be a mentor figure, but I'd love to talk with you more maybe about the path that you might be on, and about a very, very hard, cold reality of what it's like when you do become military. But
Thank you so much. This is exactly what Theater of War Productions is all about. There was a moment in a performance we did in Brooklyn in the public library. We had two rival gangs, believe it or not, reconcile in the back of the room as we were having a discussion. We had a performance in Brooklyn where a woman walked in and she heard the singing. It was our gospel choir from Antigone, and she was just looking for a notary, but they were all closed. She came into the discussion, raised her hand, and she said, "I was just looking for a notary, but I heard the beautiful music." And 12 notaries raised their hands in the room, and all of a sudden a simple question like what Imani put forward could actually lead to a moment of mentorship, both in the virtual world but in the room. That's a really beautiful thing. It shouldn't go unrecognized that we have the capacity to do this, not just nurses, but we as a people, to hear each other's needs and then to respond to them in such a direct way, and in a complex way where two different people with two different experiences of the military can offer a holistic kind of mentoring experience. We're running low on time, and I want to acknowledge, Sister Pat, I see you have the mic, but before Sister Pat, you go, I want to go to one last virtual member of the room, and then we'll come back to you for a final last word, because we wouldn't deny you that. We want to hear it from you. But Wilhelmina, you've been waiting for some time, and it's so delightful to see you back on the screen. We're unfortunately very low on time, but we'd love to hear from you. Yeah.
Hi, I was at that performance where the lady raised the notary. I am not a nurse. I want to thank you, and I appreciate all of you. My sister is an emergency room physician, so early in her career, as the older sister, I would hear the agony of the trauma that she was facing. A couple of things. I was overwhelmed by her humanity in all of it. And even as I listened, y'all, the humanity. And I think this is where I'm most afraid for us as people, is in the loss of our humanity. There's just so much stuff, and he told me to keep it short because he knows I can be long-winded. The other thing is I'm a retired banker, and the experiences that you had, oh, you're so well spoken, oh, I did not know, face the same thing. But see, y'all probably dealt with it politely. I was just straight up, what are you actually trying to say here? Because that's just my personality. But I want to thank y'all, because you talked about education, and one of the things that I used to say is reading is fundamental, because a lion is always going to be a loser because he doesn't know how to write. And you have prompted me two things. You have prompted me to finish my Read 718 application to be a volunteer tutor that is on my computer behind this screen. And the other one is I have been talking about doing some volunteer work at the local VA hospital. And I'm making a commitment to go ahead and do this. I want to thank you. I appreciate you. And I cannot begin to express all of the thoughts that are going on in my head, since he told me I only had a little bit of time. And Brian and Charlene, another fine performance. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. Thank you for being such a stalwart participant and member of our community. I love that I can cherish the memories of seeing you in person in places like Antigone and Ferguson, and the moments we've shared over the pandemic on Zoom. It's such a powerful thing to be able to come back together over and over and over this way and hear your reflections. There are other people in the audience who have their hands up that are really special members of our community that we're not going to get to, unfortunately, tonight, because the first time we did this, we did Theater of War for one of these readings for 400 Marines in San Diego, and we scheduled a 45 minutes for discussion. Discussion lasted 3.5 hours and had to be cut off at midnight, and all the Marines were talking and the spouses, and we knew we'd stumbled across something really powerful. We don't want to do that tonight because we know it's a Thursday night and people and nurses have shifts and to get to, and people are working. But before closing out, I just want to go back to the Susie King Taylor House, to Sister Pat Gunn, again, whose birthday is today. So we honor Susie King Taylor, but we also honor Sister Pat Gunn, who's a living embodiment of all of Susie King Taylor's values and courage. And for a last word from Savannah.
Brian, my heart is full. I thank you, and I thank the entire Theater of War Productions on what has happened tonight. I heard from the nurses and the veterans and everyone that came on the Savannah grounds. We're sitting in the sacred house that we claim is Susie King Taylor's. We still have the lobbying effort. We don't have our square yet. The square is just a symbolage of the work. I want you guys to think as we leave here tonight that everyone that is here, that participated, that listened, that we are all vessels for positive change. And I want you all to think about the abolitionists and how brave they were, and how, if it were not for the abolitionist movement contributing to the war efforts to end slavery is wrong. Instead of slavery ending in 1864, we may have had 1964. So fast forward, we're in the 21st century, and this is 2023. And I stand corrected, there are 23 squares, so instead of 22 now. So I want you to think about becoming an abolitionist in the 21st century in your own town. Do what John Lewis told us to do. He said, if you see something wrong in your town, you must make good trouble. We're making good trouble in Savannah, but we're just a blue ribbon model for the nation. Policy change makers is what we're looking for to do this. And so we thank the Theater of War. You have placed in our hearts and in the mouths and in the visions of the city a national lobby to get a public square for Susie King Taylor. It takes the magic of film. It takes the magic of Brian and his team and others to look at towns like ours and say, I think I can help. So you have definitely helped. And we thank you from the Center for Jubilee and our committee, which was originally the Coalition to rename Calhoun Square. It's now the Coalition to name Taylor Square. We thank you, we thank you, we thank you. And come on in the room, 21st century abolitionists. There is more than enough room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Pat. Those are beautiful last words, so powerful. We didn't come here, obviously, to tie a bow on this conversation or to put a punctuation mark, like a period at the end. It's more like an ellipses, because we know we could be talking for hours after this, and we will be in your communities, in our places of work, of worship. We hope in our families, we hope this conversation radiates off this screen and out of that beautiful house in Savannah where we last saw you in December, into places we never imagined the conversation would go. That's the hope we end every Theater of War Productions event with. After an early performance of one of our projects, this is the benediction at the end of our work every time, someone stood up and answered a question I often ask audiences: why do you think the author wrote the story or the text? And this person stood up, it was a different text, but she said, I think they wrote it to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And like Sister Pat, I love her invocation of John Lewis and good trouble, but I love the idea that we can also take comfort in what brings us together, and take comfort in our humanity when we engage with it and see it in each other. And make connections that weren't possible otherwise by giving energy to a conversation that we wouldn't necessarily have given energy to in the way we did tonight, and afflicted by the reality that there's so much work to be done to repair this wound, to heal these wrongs, and to address the struggles of people to our left and right for whom this story of Susie King Taylor's may be kitchen sink realism and not a distant memoir from 1902, as we heard from so many tonight. And it's with that sense of comfort and affliction that we leave you, with the hope that it leads to more conversation, but also that it leads to lots more actions like we saw tonight, mentorship, volunteering, engaging with the Susie King Taylor Center. We dropped the link into the chat earlier, and coming back to more of our events, obviously, and being part of the discussion, becoming part of this larger chorus. I loved our nurses tonight. They were brought to us by our partner, DAV. What an incredible group of women. I'm so just grateful for your contributions. If we were in a live setting, we'd be, again, applauding uproariously. All you have is my smiling face and Cinda's smiling face and Charlene's face, thanking you for your contributions and for joining us. It's not a small thing, and we really thank you. I want to thank Charlene for co-facilitating tonight so beautifully and for dropping those questions into the room that people did respond to and found ways to sort of assimilate into really complex answers that I'll still be thinking about for some time to come. I want to thank Marjolaine Goldsmith, who's been working behind the scenes to orchestrate the technology of tonight's event, and Sarah in Savannah, who's been working the tech in the room. Thank you so much. I want to thank our partners, of course, on the Nurse Antigone, and especially the Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund for making this work possible, the entire run. Our next performance of the Nurse Antigone will be in person, the first of our in-person events now that we're sort of crawling back into in-person events, a hybrid in-person event in New York City. We'll be announcing it very soon, but it's going to take place on May 18th in Lower Manhattan. And we're going to be inviting all the nurses who participated. Now, of course, we don't have the budget to fly everyone out, but we're going to invite you all to come. If you need an excuse to come to New York and be part of the chorus, we're going to say this is the place during National Nurses Month. This is the day, May 18th, and we're going to broadcast out of New York to the world the way we did tonight from Savannah, but we'll be there in person. It'll be our final Nurse Antigone performance, and we're mentioning it to you now, but you'll be hearing from us again about it very soon, and we are really excited to have you be part of that. We'll also be engaging those of you who came to us virtually. We'll be announcing many other performances in the days to come. And as Cinda says, if you've seen one, you've seen one, no matter what the project is. So, and Wilhelmina can attest that we really hope you'll come back and participate and be part of these performances in the future. When this Zoom closes out, for those of you who have stayed with us to the end, a survey is going to pop up, and we take your feedback very seriously. So we'd be really grateful if you could fill it out. And give us your thoughts about tonight and how it worked and what worked on you and how to make it better. But before fully closing out and saying goodnight, Charlene, I know you had some closing remarks, and I wanted to kick it over to you for the final word.
Thank you, Brian. I'll be brief. I want to thank Theater of War for having these conversations in the open amongst these beautiful, diverse individuals. All of you, thank you so much. On a platform where people not just listen, but they hear what others are saying. Discussing and bringing all this to the forefront feels liberating. It's validating. And for that, I thank you. Susie King Taylor writes these words: "These things should be kept in history before the people." So to those who tire of hearing this conversation again, this is the path I walk every day. Please come take a stroll with me.
Thank you so much, Charlene. It was such an honor to be with you. And I want to thank our friends and mentors in Savannah one last time, Sister Pat and Sister Roz, for all of their work. When it comes, and it will be soon, and Susie King Taylor's name is put on that square, and we know it's going to happen because of your efforts, we would love to broadcast a performance out of the square, which was our original intent last December, but we got rained out and had to go inside. So this is to be continued. And we can't wait to be with you in person in the fall. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank all of you for your contributions tonight. It was such an honor to be with you, and we hope to see you all again very soon at our next event, whether on Zoom or in person. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be able to do this work with you, all of you who joined us on the screen, all of you who've been watching and giving us your attention and energy. Thank you so much. Be well, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.